Hey Trailblazers, Tony Zupanzik here, and I'm very excited to share this session that I've put together for the 2023 Connections Conference. This year I will be presenting on enhancing Salesforce Marketing Cloud CloudPages with JavaScript using VueJS. So using modern JavaScript frameworks and dev tools. My name is Tony Zupanzik, and I am a marketing champion. I've been in the Salesforce Marketing Cloud ecosystem for around 6 years now, and I'm very excited to give this presentation. So we're talking about CloudPages, one of my favorite features within Salesforce Marketing Cloud. CloudPages are simple, single-page application and processes typically created for public-facing user experiences. So that means a standard HTML, JavaScript, CSS website, web page for your customers to experience. You can do preference centers, things like that. They're very flexible in that you can use HTML and client-side JavaScript to enhance your pages. What makes them very powerful is that you can combine all of that with server-side JavaScript and AMP to leverage your data from directly within Salesforce Marketing Cloud. Pair that with VueJS. VueJS is very approachable. VueJS is a modern JavaScript framework that builds on top of standard HTML and CSS. The documentation for VueJS is fantastic. It's super easy to approach and very easy to learn. It's performant and it's truly reactive. It's designed to be used either with or without a build step. It's versatile. So that means that it's rich and incrementally adaptable into your current pages. So you can bring in VueJS to your current projects or start from scratch. And you can add VueJS as little or as much as you want. So what are some of the benefits of using VueJS? VueJS comes with a template syntax that simply extends your HTML. So it's very familiar and you're not dealing with a whole separate set of syntax that you have to learn. It's very familiar and very approachable in that way. VueJS is reactive. What that means is that when a data point within your application changes, VueJS immediately makes that accessible to your browser. So you'll automatically see that change happen in real time. With VueJS, you're able to take your application and take your landing page and break it down into reusable, smaller components that are isolated, which helps in troubleshooting and making sure that your application is running as you intend it to. With VueJS, you can actually use this framework directly in your browser through a CDN without any build step. And it does so natively. It's designed to work both with and without that build step. So with Vue.js and the introduction of being able to think in components, thinking modularly helps take complex and very large scale applications and makes them more approachable by being able to break them down into bite-sized pieces. So when you do that, each component has its specific purpose. It has its place in your application. You can build out Vue.js components to be reusable. So you can take that component and take that styling and take everything that comes along with it and simply pop it in somewhere else where you need that functionality, and it's going to work. Because of that, you're able to easily add and remove components and features as needed. So let's take a look at some code here. So in the screenshot, we have a very, very basic structure of what a Vue.js web application might look like. Now, it's not anything outstanding, not something complex, but you can start to see where that familiarity comes in at. You start to see that familiar structure with the HTML tags. You bring it in through the CDN. So Vue.js comes straight in through your CDN, through that script tag. You have a div container that has the ID of app. which is where your entire application is going to end up rendering. And then you have your script tag with your core app.js object. And that's what is going to tell VueJS what to render in that div container. So let's take a look at what we're going to go over. And we're not going to get into the specific code here, but there will be code on GitHub that you can go in and dive into and take a look at in more depth and detail. So with this, we're just going to look at how you would build a simple data extension search. So you have people within your organization that need to be able to find data extension data. They don't want to sludge around through the platform to find the information they need. So we're going to build them a data extension search. So it's going to be a simple search with results. We're going to take a look at it and build it in modularized components. The way that I like to build out CloudPage applications is using code snippet content blocks. And then rather than that form submission being to that same page, we're going to use an asynchronous submit method that's going to post to a code resource page. So let's take a look at how we would get started. Here you see the entirety of the app that we're kind of looking to build, or most of it, and you see it can kind of get very long. So this is the CloudPage template, and my take on what goes on the actual cloud page should be minimal. You have your code structure, you have all the imports that are responsible for your Vue.js, your CSS framework if you decide to use one, any other kind of packages you want to bring in. So that's where those things go. And then you have your AMP script imports, which will bring in your HTML and your JavaScript. So again, the goal of this for me is to only touch, update, and publish when absolutely necessary. So what we can do is we can take your cloud page itself and bring it from something like this to something like this, where everything is brought in by AMP script, by the content block by ID. And the only thing that's really on this page is your script imports and those AMP script content block by ID functions. So let's take a look at the actual page and how we can take this and break it down into specific components that will make building our application a little bit easier. So the first thing we have is our core components. We have our app.js, which is the brains of the JavaScript behind the Vue.js application. And then we have our app.html, which is basically going to be all of our components, all of our structural HTML elements. Then we go a layer deeper and we have our search and our results components. So the search component is going to be responsible for that user intake and the submit action. And then that result component is going to be responsible for simply displaying the results that we get back from Salesforce Marketing Cloud on your page. Now, if we wanted to, and in the GitHub repository, we can also take it and break it down one layer farther and break it down to that list item element. So if we wanted to control specifically that, and we only wanted to have that in one place or reuse that styling somewhere else, we can isolate that, bring that out as well, and have that be its own component. So let's talk a little bit about the core components and break those down a little bit. As I mentioned, the app.js component is the brains behind your Vue.js application. There's a couple different Vue.js specific pieces to it. And if you notice that app.js is a simple object that gets fed into the Vue.js rendering system. So let's break that down. So the first thing you'll see is a components object. That components object helps you render and register your components that you want to use within your application. That data function is all of your data points that you're using within your application are going to go here. So anything that's here, you can have two-way binding through the vModel method in VueJS, and you can read and update these items reactively. Next one down is your methods. So your methods are your standard JavaScript functions. So this is what's going to be responsible for our AJAX call to our code resource page. And then that last line is where that magic really happens, where you are taking all of this app.js JavaScript and everything that's going along with your application and essentially rendering it in that dev container with that app ID. So if you look over to the app HTML screenshot, you'll see it's just your couple pieces of components. So there's a couple different ways you can build out the app HTML. Whatever works for you is, right. There's no right or wrong way to build it out. The way that I like to build it out is I like to keep my containers nice and neat and tidy and keep as much of the code within those components. You could also do structural elements if you wanted to have like a navigation, things like that could also go in here. With the components, you'll see a couple different Vue.js syntax items, the @submit search and the semicolon submit results or search results. These are pieces of the child components that are either sending data from the child component to your parent component, so the app.js component, or taking in that data so it can be used. So the search container is pushing that data out so that your app.js can make your AJAX request, and that search results component is taking the data in so it can be displayed. So let's dive into your child components and what makes up a child component. So you'll see that there's very similar elements to a child component. Pretty much anything you can use in your app.js component, you can use in a child component. The difference is that in the child components, you have this template string down at the very bottom, and that is what the child component is going to render for your HTML. So again, they are just simple JavaScript objects. You have that template HTML string, and with the child components, you can either take data in or push data out. So you can push data out through the emit function, which just signals that you're sending data up, and this is the function that you should run for the app.js component. So the goal of these is to let the app.js, the core.js file, do the heavy lifting. So that's why we're not making the specific AJAX call here. We're making it from the app.js component, and we're simply using this to take in that information and pass in the user's input up to the app.js. The other reason we're doing that is because we want to receive that data in the highest level of our application so we can easily pass it down into the child component. So let's take a look at the flow of how our application works. So starting off on the right side, we have our search component, which our user puts in the data extension name they're looking for. They click the search. You move on to number 2, which is the app.js or the client-side JavaScript, which runs that submit search function. That makes your AJAX call to your code resource page, which then, if you can imagine, you have a get data extensions function, which then pulls your data from Salesforce Marketing Cloud, and then you make your response back to your app.js, which takes that in and then pushes that to your search results component. Now, in here, there's a lot of data manipulation that you can do, data cleanup, things like that. But that's what you can do when you spread it out and split out your functionality a little bit, is you can figure out where those data modifications and that transformations are best suited to happen, and have the option to do that there. So the next thing that I want to talk about past the actual VueJS framework is dev tools. So we all know that working in a cloud page can be a somewhat frustrating experience simply because the dreaded 500 error. So one of the things that VueJS can help with is not necessarily fixing that 500 error, but on the client side, you can visualize your data so that the data coming in, you know exactly what's coming in, what that structure is, and what you have available to you. And you can actually set that data structure before you even start your application. You can also track down your problems in your components a lot easier. So if you have a piece of data that is not formatted correctly or is not coming through correctly, or you have a bit of logic that you feel is off, you can track it down specifically to that component level and see where that data point is trailing off at, so you can go to that source and fix it there. With a lot of the logic, you can actually test your variables and your state directly in your browser. So because of VueJS DevTools, you can actually go in and change values right there in your browser and see in real time what effect it's going to have on your application. So you don't have to go all the way back and reset from the very beginning. So taking a look at the DevTools, you can kind of see I have that data extension search component that I've highlighted. And then down below in the data object, you can see that the form data object is a reactive element. So as soon as that is updated, it's going to automatically update the document object model, and it's going to be readily available. And then also in here, you'll be able to see different events. So for example, your changing of the input, you'll see those effects. And then you'll see any kind of click actions and other elements like that. So with that, one of the biggest things is, when should you use VueJS, or when can it be used? VueJS can really be used on any cloud page project that you feel you need a little bit of extra help with your data structure or that reactivity aspect of it. If you're doing a single, like a very simple, basic cloud page, might not be needed. But where it really shines is that small to medium-sized pages or applications where you're really handling a lot of data, and you have a lot of events going on and a lot of things to track. Where you might want to either not use VueJS or even look elsewhere outside of CloudPages is once you hit that large-scale applications. Salesforce Marketing Cloud is not really suited for that. Not to say it can't be done, but it's going to be a lot harder to manage in Salesforce Marketing Cloud in the long run. But for that small to medium-sized applications, VueJS really shines, and it really does a lot of good things for your development workflow. So thank you so much for checking out the video and the session. And the QR code is my link tree, which has my socials, and it also has a link to the repository that has all of this code. So if you want to take a deeper look into what this build looks like in practice, that code is at my GitHub. Would love to know any comments, thoughts. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.